Welcome in, everyone, to another edition of the GSMC College Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host, as always, Tommy Brzee. It is Monday, September 16th around here, and we have a great show for you today. We are going to do a full reaction from Week 3. It was downright crazy all around college football, but we'll get into the UGA game first. They escaped a win in Lexington. Very, very tough game against Kentucky that has kind of become a trend for UGA. Then we'll get into LSU coming back from 17 down to beat South Carolina. Got a little bit of help from the refs to get there, but then we'll get into the SEC catch-up. We'll get into Bama, Missouri beating Boston College, as well as A&M going down to Gainesville and likely ending the Billy Napier era in Gainesville for the Gators. And then upset watch around the country. We had a number of Group of 5 teams beat Power 5 teams. Toledo, the main among them, just absolutely rolled Mississippi State. So we'll get into that in the fourth segment before finishing out with a little bit of a whip around, go to all the other games that we haven't got a chance to get to. We'll get into the Texas game, how Quinn Ewers went down. Doesn't sound like it's too serious, but we'll get into that in the last segment as well. So going to be a great show for you today. Very, very packed show. But before we jump in, I do want to remind you all we get tons of questions and comments throughout the show, and the best way for you all to get your questions on the screen, get them to the top of the list, is to use that super chat at the bottom of the screen. You'll see that little $sign at the bottom of the chat on the Sports Network page. Just click on that. Any question, any comment you have, you can leave it there, and I will absolutely get to it as soon as I can. Sometimes in the chat it goes just a little bit fast. And then if you'd like to use that gsmcpodcast.net page, that is up and running as well. But let's go ahead and jump into this because there is so much stuff to get to today. There is so much stuff that happened this past weekend, but I do want to start in Lexington, Kentucky, where UGA was able to escape with a win. And this was one that I did not see how this going this way. I'll be totally honest with you. This was a very, very interesting game going in, and frankly, I probably should have given it more credence because the last couple of times Georgia's gone up to Lexington to play a game, they scored 14 points, 16 points, and now 13 points. So not like they've been able to light it up against Kentucky by any means when they're up there in Lexington. So I think it's one of those games that you look back if you're Kentucky and you definitely have some frustration about. I think it's impossible not to, right? You have so much stuff that you feel like you left on the table in this game, particularly offensively, so many things that should have been done better. And then I think a couple of the decision-making things down the stretch of this game were just not that great. I think one of the big-time ones, obviously, was punting on that 4th and 8 when they were to go up, they were down. They were down by 1 on a 4th and 8 with a chance to kind of finish the game. If they had gotten that first down, go down, kick a field goal, win it in regulation, they give the ball back to Georgia with about 2.5, 3 minutes left. There was no world where they were getting that ball back. I understand that sometimes you got to play the odds, and their defense was playing really well and all of that stuff. They were not getting the ball back from Georgia. You don't give the ball back to the number 1 team in the country at your home stadium when you're within 1 point. You just don't do it, especially when you're in plus territory. I understand it was the 47 or whatever of Georgia, but you got to take your shot when you have them. Georgia was on the ropes. You knew you had a team that was playing a little bit nervous right about now. You make one play, and that game might be over. So I didn't necessarily love that decision. I also didn't love kicking a field goal to go up 6 early on in the second half. I felt like that was a really good drive for them. Felt like they should probably finish that off, try to get in the end zone, and if you don't, you pin Georgia very deep, and they have to figure out how to get out of there with an offense that had not been working throughout that day. So it's one of those things that it's a nitpicky thing. I think there's a number of different ways to look at it, but overall, I think you look at this game, it was just about Georgia making the plays down the stretch. They did the things that they had to do. They lost Tate Ratledge early on, which will definitely be something to watch for that Alabama game that's going to be up in a couple of weeks. But Carson Beck missed a lot of throws that he usually makes. There were a couple of very questionable play calling decisions throughout this game. A lot of stuff that just didn't look like Georgia out there on that field this Saturday. So a lot of stuff to figure out. No two ways about that. Georgia has definitely got a lot of things that they need to get in order, but this is probably exactly what they needed to kind of whip them into shape, get them ready, and keep them moving on throughout this season. I think Kirby's going to have those guys really ready to go when they go to Tuscaloosa. I can almost promise you that because these next 15 days are going to be incredibly tough for that group. I can promise you this is going to be a very intense time at Georgia practice, and they're going to try to get that stuff figured out as quickly as possible, and then be ready for that Alabama game in a couple of weeks, which is getting more and more interesting by the day, and we'll talk about Bama here in a second. But how did Georgia win this game? And frankly, there were a number of ways that I don't even know how they were able to win this game. But halftime adjustments obviously played a huge role. When they came out of halftime, they went field goal, touchdown to get back within, or to get the lead that they would not give back. So did exactly what you needed to do coming out of half. None of this was clean, don't get me wrong. But having 58 yards going into halftime and then being able to come out, score 10 quick points, and take that lead that would be yours for the rest of the game is a big deal. And I think the offense kind of went stagnant from there. There were a number of ways that they needed to be better. I think the biggest thing for me was, you know what Deone Walker is. You know what Tryon Rebika is. You know what Rybka, You know what those players are. You know how elite they are. You have to get these guys out on the edge. There were way too many runs right up in the middle into a very loaded box for Kentucky. You can't do that if you're Georgia. You have too many athletes on the field to not be able to stretch them side to side. So I thought that was really weird. South Carolina did such a good job against Kentucky, getting Lenora Sellers on the outside, getting Rocket Sanders on the outside, and then when you have your moments, picking the inside run. But when you have someone like Trevor Etienne, it just felt like they were pushing way too much energy in. We have to get the run game going. It has to be in the inside because then that will open up passing lanes. I suppose it will, but you won't be able to run the ball, really. You won't be able to do what they needed to do throughout this game, which was, in a large part, just control the clock for a lot of this, because Kentucky did it incredibly well, and it kept them kept them in this game for as long as it did. But overall, I mean, you make the halftime adjustments, you bounce back, you get the win, but there's so many things about this game, about this play calling, especially on the offensive side of the ball, that just didn't make sense to me. It was all over the place, and it felt like Mike Bobo, particularly on Saturday, was just a little bit all over the place. Couldn't decide exactly what he wanted to do, and the only time he really decided it was when he tried to run straight into a pack of gray jerseys. So it's a very confusing game plan right now. They're gotta get that fixed as quickly as possible. But at the end of the day, another reason was the defense played really well. They were bend, don't break. They did exactly what you needed them to do, which was just force field goals every single day. And don't get me wrong, Kentucky kind of met them halfway here because they did not play very good football. Let's just be honest. The passing game down the field was relatively non-existent. Brock Vandagriff missed a number of passes that could have been made and been for huge gains, including one that might have just finished the game with about 3 minutes left. They had a tight end over the middle of the field that he just outright missed. And if he hit him, then this game's a lot different. But the reality is, you have so many things going right for that UGA team right now. The defensive line, I apologize. The defensive line has real problems. They do not nearly have the depth on the interior that they need right now. Now, they do have 13 days right here to get healthy and get everyone back on the field, but they need to get everyone back on the field. It can't be, a couple of guys coming back here and there, because they have a pretty steep drop-off after those first two guys, and you can't have Christian Miller out there playing 35 snaps a game. That's just not going to be a winning formula, especially as you get deeper into SEC play. But overall, played really good defense. Jalen Walker was on the stat sheet, only had 2 tackles and 1 pass breakup. He was everywhere. He was absolutely remarkable in this game, had all the pressures in the world. Tyron Ingram-Dawkins was everywhere as well. The defense did plenty. The defense did exactly what you expect the Georgia defense to do, especially when their offense is struggling, which is just keep them in the game and then let them make the plays down the stretch, which is exactly what happened. Carson Beck played really, really iffy football for a vast majority of this game. Felt like he was very uncomfortable, did not expose zone coverage the way that he usually does. It was a very uncharacteristic game from Carson Beck above anything else, but he made very few elite throws. The one he did make sealed the deal to Dominic Lovett for 33 yards. His feet were basically in his end zone, and he threw an absolute dart. It was a huge, huge play, and it was one of those things that you just needed it. You needed one play throughout this game to make this thing, to kind of put this thing on ice, and you put the ball in the hands of Carson Beck, and he makes a huge one. So it's still this UGA team, right? A lot of things can go wrong the first, 3.5 quarters. A million things can go wrong. The reality is, at the end of the day, if Carson Beck can make that one play down the stretch of the game, you're likely going to have a good shot to win. And then Trevor Etienne really turned it up in the second half. Didn't necessarily play very great football throughout this game, but when they needed him to make plays, he really made some plays. But overall, I think you're coming out of this game, and where these teams go from here, I think for Kentucky, this one hurts. You're coming off a game where you got absolutely bullied by a team that you likely shouldn't have in a lot of different ways, and you are coming into this game with a lot of people questioning what Mark Stoops is doing, how this team is going to work out. Are they even going to go 7-5 or 6-6? There's so many different questions around this team, and then you barely miss out. You barely miss out on that one win that would totally change their season, that would totally change their fans' ideology throughout the season. So it's hurt. It definitely hurts. There's no two ways about that. They have so many things to figure out on the offensive side of the ball. Have to find more of a run game. Brock Vandegrift has to get things going in the pass game. Has to be more comfortable back there because he is a dangerous passer. The reality is, if he's not going to make the reads that are in front of him, you're not going to be able to move forward with him at quarterback. Now, the problem is, I don't know that the guy behind him is all that better in Gavin Wimsatt, but you got to figure out something else. You got to figure out a new way to go about business on offense because this is just not working, and it won't work against pretty much any defense that has a pass rush. Just the reality of the situation right now for Kentucky. The good news is, your defense is going to give you a lot of chances to win. They played really good football throughout this game, and they're really good on pretty much every level. Maxwell Harrison on the back end is an elite corner. You have a ton of really good linebackers, including a Georgia transfer in Jamon Dumas-Johnson, and then Deone Walker up front just speaks for itself. An absolute beast, definitely will be a first-round talent, and one of those guys that I think can change this season for Kentucky. Now, they got some tough games coming up. They do have Ohio at home before they go to Oxford to play Ole Miss, and it's going to be one of those things that I look at them a lot like I looked at last year's team, where you have all this going in, you feel like everything is kind of lining up to work out for in your favor, and then you just miss the mark. The offense doesn't look as clean as it probably could and should look, and you're missing a lot of what makes this team, or what could make this team special this upcoming year. So it's another year where Kentucky came in with pretty high hopes, and I think are going to be left a little bit disappointed at the end of the year. And then for Georgia, that didn't look like a Georgia team, period. I think it was one of the worst performances I've seen from a Kirby Smart Georgia team in his entire career there. But the reality is, they got through with a win. And that's the end-all, be-all at the end of the day. But the thing is, they do have to figure out the offensive side of the football. They've played one good half of football against a good defense throughout this year, and it was the second half of that Clemson game. That was the only time where this offense looked like it was fully rolling, at least against an elite defense like Clemson or Kentucky. You're going to play elite defenses coming forward. They're also going to have an elite offense on the other side. You're going to play Ole Miss, and they're going to have Jackson Dart. You're going to play Alabama in a couple weeks. They'll have Jalen Milroe that can absolutely tear your heart out in a second. And then you'll play Texas down the road, and whether it's Arch Manning or it's Quinn Ewers right about this moment, it seems like they're going to be able to do the exact same that Alabama can do. So you're just going to have to be ready. You're going to have to play cleaner on the offensive side of the football. And then the thing that coming out of this game that everyone's talking about is this is probably what they needed. This is probably what Kirby needed to get their guys focused and ready. Now, they have had a number of these throughout the last couple of seasons. They've been able to win most of them, but the reality is they got a lot to fix. This is not a team that is going to walk into Tuscaloosa and get a win by this point. They have so many things that they need to figure out, and I think the biggest thing is just these next 13 days in Athens, Georgia for a football player are going to be really tough. I cannot imagine Kirby Smart is super happy about what he saw this weekend, and I think it's going to be a lot of wind sprints for Georgia throughout this next week, and then we'll see what they can do in Tuscaloosa in a couple of weeks. Definitely a win that Georgia will take. They will put it on their schedule and keep it moving, but so many things to figure out for Georgia, and that team that they're playing in a couple weeks don't have too much to figure out, at least as it looks right now. But let's take our first break here, and when we come back, we're going to talk about that LSU South Carolina game. All over the place, and a lot of it had to do with those guys wearing the black and white, so we'll get into that right after this, so stick with us.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign.
I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient. Hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing. Sold out shows where 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown. Get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the noose it fits. I'm losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about that rather gross game that happened up in Lexington this past weekend. Georgia did come out with a win 13-12, and they're going to have to figure out a lot of stuff before they go to Tuscaloosa in a couple of weeks. But let's get into this LSU game, because this was the craziest game of the weekend. There is no two ways about that. If you have not watched this game, go back and watch it. It is as college football as you could possibly get, right down to the officiating job. There were a number of calls throughout this game that were just terrible. There's really no other way to put it. I would love to sugarcoat this for the officiating crews, but man, there were a couple in this game that were just all over the place and had no business being called. The main among them being that unnecessary roughness against Kyle Kennard. I don't know how they got to that, frankly. I genuinely don't understand. Maybe I'm misunderstanding the rule. That's a defender. Garrett Nussmeier is a defender. After he throws that pick, once he starts running towards the ball, you were allowed to block him. Now, what I will say is Kyle Kennard had no business blocking him. He didn't need to block him, so that is the other part of the argument. Doesn't necessarily matter to me. Whether he needed to or he didn't need to, it wasn't a penalty, plain and simple. So that was the very, very tough one for South Carolina. There was an offensive pass interference call earlier in the game that was all over the place. I think the horse collar tackle was a horse collar tackle. I don't know if there's a real argument the other direction, but South Carolina fans were plenty mad about everything else, so that was one that got a little bit of attention as well. Overall, I think officiating played their role. That is for sure. They were a big part of this game when that should never be the case, but they were a big part of this game. But the bigger part was obviously losing Lenora Sellers. When you lose a player like that on your offense that is so important, that brings so much energy to that team, and frankly, makes you just a little bit scared of this passing attack. The South Carolina passing attack is not going to be scary. Let's just call a spade a spade. They're not going to be an elite passing attack. The reality is, they're a little bit scarier with Lenora Sellers back there, and that's really all you need. When Robbie Ashford came into this game, it was very stagnant. LSU knew exactly what they were going to do, and they were saying, we're going to blitz a lot of people, we're going to force you to run the ball, and if you want to pass the ball, more than fine. Robbie Ashford's going to miss guys. That's the reality of the situation, and that was exactly what LSU did throughout the entirety of the second half, was just attack. All-out attack from start to finish, because they knew the guy back there did not have the ability of the other guy. Now, Lenora Sellers' arm is not necessarily the craziest thing in the world, and they weren't lighting LSU up down the field, but the biggest difference is Lenora Sellers in this game had 10 carries, 88 yards before he left it. Robbie Ashford comes in, 11 carries, 11 yards. That's the big difference. If Rocket Sanders is the only thing you have to worry about for LSU's defense, they're going to look successful. They're going to be able to stop you at least from time to time, and they did let Rocket Sanders get lost in one of those. But overall, I think there are a number of different things to take away, and obviously South Carolina fans are going to say this thing got stolen from them, and I in some ways agree with you. I'm not necessarily taking that away, but LSU coming back from 17 down is a big deal. You know, there are a number of things that had to happen in this game, probably one of them being Sellers going down, unfortunately, for LSU to find their way back into this game, but also LSU had to do a lot of things right. They had to play a lot of really good football and had to attack on the defensive side of the ball, and they did a really good job of that in the second half. So as many chances that were taken out of South Carolina's hands, I fully understand how upset you are. far. I'm not necessarily trying to tell you that you have no reason to be mad at the officiating. You definitely do. It was an absolute nightmare from start to finish, and something that has to be figured out by the SEC office and really just college football overall. But we can get into that tomorrow. I definitely will want to talk about that tomorrow. But overall, I think a good win for LSU, a devastating loss for South Carolina, but how did LSU get it done? Because a lot of things had to go right, obviously, but I narrowed in on a couple of big-time things here. I think Caden Durham coming in changed this game. Overnight, there was a second where Caden Durham walked onto the field. The next 2 plays later, touchdown. And then they opened so many different things up where this run game is not scary by any means. Caleb Jackson, Josh Williams, they're solid players. Caden Durham gives them something. Caden Durham gives them a spark that they very badly needed. And that third and 9 call for that touchdown where that was a great call, a great run, just a crazy call in some ways, but it worked out beautifully. And this is a really special athlete. It's one of those guys that I know you want to give preference to Caleb Jackson and Josh Williams that have done all the work and are comfortable in the offense, and I get all of that. The reality is, sometimes you just need the most athletic kid on the field. Sometimes you just need the kid that is going to create holes for himself and the kid that is going to play as hard as can be because he is a freshman, because he does want to prove himself. So 11 carries, 98 yards, 2 touchdowns in this game. He did everything that they needed him to do, and he was the spark that they very badly needed on the offensive side of the ball. So the freshman came up huge, and they badly need someone to step up in that run game, and maybe it's him. Who knows? But the other part was something we've talked about, creating issues in pass rush. After Lenora Sellers went down, it was all about just dialing it up in the second half. It was all about getting after Robbie Ashford, making him beat you with his arm, and if he's not going to do that, then he's not going to win. That's just the reality of Robbie Ashford right about now. So Harold Perkins ended with 3 tackles, 1 tackle for loss. That is not even near the effect that he had on this game. He was all over the place in this game, and he created so many problems, and more than anything, created a lot of free rushes for Brandon Swinson, who went 3 sacks, was absolutely a game wrecker in this game. I believe had a forced fumble late in this one as well, but really, really incredible. And the biggest factor here is, if you can't throw the ball downfield, Blake Baker's scheme is going to look really good. They like to be on attack mode. They like to play man coverage on the back end. If your receivers are not going to be able to get separation and your quarterback is not going to be able to put it there, LSU is going to be able to run the defense that they want to run. So this kind of gives you an idea. That second half gives you an idea of what this looked like in the best possible circumstances. This is what it should look like in 2 or 3 years when Blake Baker really gets rolling at LSU. Is they should be on attack mode pretty much from start to finish. They should have really good coverage corners on the back end that can play man coverage pretty much every down, and they'll be able to win a lot of games. The thing is, once you face an elite passing team that has that, counterpunch to what you're trying to do, it's going to be really hard to beat those teams. It doesn't mean that they're not moving in the right direction. I think Blake Baker's scheme obviously works. There's enough guys in that room to make it work. The thing is, this was a team that made it look a lot better because of the passing attack that South Carolina has, or lack thereof. It made it a lot easier for LSU to kind of just zero in on that. And then finally, the responding. I think this was something that we've talked about a lot. Winning when you're down 17-0 away from home, that's a big deal. There's no two ways about that. I know a lot of things went LSU's direction in this game, but the reality is a lot of things had to go their direction, and a lot of things South Carolina kind of handed LSU in a number of different ways. So we can talk about a number of different things, but SC had a 14-point lead nearing halftime. LSU was able to force a fumble, get back, and score a touchdown. They also, and then get the ball back and score the winner. They did a number of really, really good things throughout this game. LSU also took the lead on the first play of the fourth quarter, and then Rocket Sanders came back in 3 plays and ran, I believe, 67 yards for a touchdown. And then they responded right back. So LSU just had enough plays. It was the same thing as Georgia had up in Lexington, where a lot of things went crazy, a lot of things were all over the place, and a lot of things were downright wrong in this game. Don't get me wrong about that, but the reality is I do think this is one of those games where LSU badly needed it. I think South Carolina really wanted it. I think there were a number of things that really went their way or really went LSU's direction that kept them from doing what they wanted to do. But obviously, you got to move forward. You got to figure out what you're going to do. I know the SEC offices are getting just blown up from South Carolina right about now. But at the end of the day, we'll see what happens with it. We'll see if any of those calls are, reversed. It doesn't matter if they're reversed, but maybe it'll make South Carolina fans feel a little bit better. Overall, a very, very frustrating game in a number of different ways depending on the way you were watching it, but at the end of the day, a very fun game, up and down, craziness, college football, all of it was absolutely there. And the only advice I would have for South Carolina is keep your fans in their seats before the game is ended. Just a general rule, whenever a game is within one score down the stretch of the game, just stay in your seats. You'll have time to get down to the field. You'll have time to rush the field, I promise you. Just don't tempt fate, because they tried to do that and it did not work, and now a lot of them are getting made fun of. But overall, I think, where do you go from here? This one hurts for South Carolina. It's really hard for me to look at this one as anything less than kind of a nightmare coming out of this weekend. You had a lot of calls go against you. You were coming off a game where you thought you were playing really good football, maybe able to turn some stuff around, do some really good things. And then you get a huge game at home, game days in town. LSU, obviously not necessarily the elite team in the SEC, but they're still LSU. That still carries a lot of weight. And you were able to push them to the limit. You were able to go up 17. You were able to really get elite pass rush against one of the best offensive lines in the country. You were able to do so many great things in this game. And then you just come up short. And now you're sitting there thinking, oh, well, what do we do now? You're 2-1. You still have plenty of games in front of you, but they're not easy games by any means. So it's not like LSU is going to be the toughest game that South Carolina plays. There are plenty coming up, including South Carolina, or Ole Miss coming to South Carolina in a couple of weeks. But overall, I think you got to just regroup and keep it moving. You're a team that's playing relatively good football right now. I don't know that it's going to be all that impressive of a season from South Carolina, but man, this felt like the game where if they were able to win this game, we'd be talking about them totally differently. But as we walk out of it, I have some questions just about what this team can do this upcoming year, not because of what I think this team is, because I really didn't change my opinion too much about South Carolina after this game, but there's so many teams in front of them that are going to play cleaner football than LSU. That's just the reality. So it's hard for me to sit here and say South Carolina can bounce back and make themselves a SEC dark horse, because there's just too many games there. Maybe they can. Maybe that pass rush can get them there. But as of right now, it's just a really terrible loss and a chance that really could have flipped this program on its head pretty quickly. But LSU on the other side, I think when you come out of this game, I don't know if there was anyone that was any more impressed with LSU after this game than they were before. The resiliency was great, and being able to come back from 17 down is a very big deal. There's no two ways about that, but at the end of the day, they did not play great football in this game. They were a little bit all over the place defensively, especially early on. The only time that they were able to do stuff defensively was when a quarterback was on the field that they were not worried about throwing the ball, and there were a number of things on the offensive side of the ball that were not as clean as they had been in past weeks. So overall, I think LSU played good enough. They got the job done. They move on with a win, and that's really the end-all be-all here, right? LSU is just trying to stay in the hunt. They're trying to stay in the race for the SEC, and getting this win. Now you have UCLA coming to town, South Alabama before a bye week, and then you got Ole Miss coming to town. So you got a couple of weeks here where LSU could get two big wins, go into a bye week, and then who knows who they are when Ole Miss comes to town. Who knows how much they've fixed and how much they've gotten better, and maybe they're a team that can get that win, and if they do, then we're officially talking about them back in the CFP hunt after a really gross week one. It would be crazy to think that, but as of right now, LSU did just enough to stay in the hunt, and they'll try to do that next week and the week after and see where they land in November. But a crazy game, one of those that a lot was decided by the people that were not wearing the football jerseys, but at the end of the day, that's part of our sport, and I will get into that tomorrow. I have plenty of calls from this past weekend that were just mind-boggling at the end of the day, but for more than anything else, really, really fun game. LSU gets a big win. South Carolina, still a lot of positives to take away from this game, but definitely one where you feel like you left a lot on the table. Game day in town, LSU in town, your fans fully behind you. Just felt like that one was one that slipped away that you're going to really wish you had back at the end of the season. But at the end of the day, you keep moving forward. You try to bounce back and see what you can do in the SEC this upcoming year. But let's take a break, and then we'll get into the rest of the SEC teams. We'll get into Bama handling Wisconsin, Missouri outlasting Boston College, Texas A&M just rolling Florida, and maybe a firing happening there here pretty soon. But we'll break that down right after this, so stick with us.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube, absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSMC College Football Podcast, Chip Shot Football Podcast, Hoops and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network, now available on YouTube absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube right now.
Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just broke down that crazy game in South Carolina this past weekend. LSU gets a very close win, 36-33 in that one, and a lot of people asking questions of the SEC office around officiating today. I can promise you that, around Columbia, South Carolina. But let's get into the other SEC teams that played today, at least the ones that played marquee games today. And I do want to start with that Bama game, because I talked about how the LSU game, in my opinion, was the most important or the biggest win of the weekend, at least in terms of keeping them in the hunt, keeping them in the race for the CFP, and just keeping their head above water more than anything else. But Alabama, I think, had the most impressive win. I think when I was watching this game, there were a number of moments where you felt like, okay, Alabama at some point is going to come back down to earth. At some point, Jalen Milroe is going to miss someone, and Wisconsin's going to get a pick, and this thing will at least get a little bit closer. It didn't even get close to that. Alabama was absolutely a well-oiled machine on Saturday, and they did everything that you would possibly want Jalen Milroe to do throughout this game. So it was really impressive. Wisconsin was just outmatched in this one. Losing Tyler Van Dyke played a huge part in that offense just going totally stagnant. But to be fair, even if he was in, I don't know if it would have gone much better, if I'm being honest. But I do think this Bama team has kind of found itself on offense. I think they know exactly how they want to go about business, and it's more efficient than a year ago, which is a very scary reality for a lot of the teams that have them on their schedule. But how Bama won this game, a lot of it has to do with Wisconsin. This Wisconsin offense is as confusing of a thing as there is in the entire country. I have no earthly idea what Wisconsin wants to be. I have no idea if they want to be a run-first team or a pass-first team. I think Phil Longo coming in, you thought they were going to lean a little bit more towards the pass, but the best players on your team are the two running backs, Ches Malusi and Tyree Walker. They're not getting the ball enough. And I understand you're playing from behind. You have to pass the ball. That is a huge part of this. So not necessarily taking anything away from the play calling, because I understand the circumstances. The reality is Ches Malusi getting 11 carries in a game just can't happen. I understand you were down early. You weren't down early enough and big enough of a margin for that to just totally get out of your game plan. So I just thought it was a little bit bland. I didn't have an idea of what Wisconsin wants to be going forward. There were not a lot of great passes. There was no receiver with outside of Will Paulding that had more than 2 catches. They were all over the place, and there was no real discernible identity among this offense, and if they don't find one in the hurry, this is going to be an ugly season for Wisconsin. And then you dominated the middle 8. I think Nick Saban would be about as happy as anyone that they dominated the middle 8 in this game, because that was one of the things Saban preached just to the rooftops. He was very, very intent on them winning those 4 minutes going into halftime, and then the 4 minutes coming out. Absolutely huge. And Bama got a missed field goal, a touchdown, halftime, and then a touchdown. So did exactly what you would want to do if you were a Nick Saban type guy. But overall, I think the knockout punch was right before they went into halftime, a drive where they had 2 passes. Ryan Williams, who is still outright insane as a 17-year-old, just giving you an update. He is still incredible. And then Jeremy Bernard in the corner of the end zone, 2 of the better passes that I've seen Jalen Milroe Milroe throw. And frankly, he made 3 or 4 passes in this game that might have been up towards the top 10 throws that I've seen him make, particularly the first touchdown to Ryan Williams. Being able to make that throw in that spot is really, really impressive and shows you kind of the strides that Milroe has taken. I think there's a number of things that he hasn't necessarily come too far in, including the intermediate passing game, the more NFL level throws. Doesn't sound like he really needs to. If they're going to run the offense this efficiently with him going 12 for 17, 196 through the air, 3 touchdowns, 14 carries, 75 yards, 2 touchdowns, it's never going to be a problem. If you're running the ball that efficiently, if you're doing everything you wanted to do on the offensive side of the ball with Milroe, it doesn't matter if he's making those NFL throws. He is a Heisman-level player, and it definitely is in the Heisman conversation. I had a take earlier last week talking about he was going to be the story of the weekend coming out. I feel pretty good about that. I think Jalen Milroe was the story coming out of this weekend. Well, probably would have been more so if there weren't these upsets that we'll talk about here in a second, but really impressive performance, and as far as I'm concerned, he is right up there in the top 5 of the Heisman odds right about now. But let's get into this A&M game, and we'll keep this one a little bit short and sweet just to leave my Florida fans alone for a second, but this was it. This was the knockout punch. This was everything that was wrong about Florida, everything you worried about as a Florida fan, everything that you dreaded as a Florida fan. It was all on display this past Saturday, and there were a number of things that, frankly, went their direction going into this game. Marcel Reed came in as a backup quarterback, playing in the swamp in front of a fan base that knew they needed the win, and against a team that knew they needed the win, against a coach that knew he needed the win, and they came up flat. Florida did not play even remotely a good game in this one. There was not even a chance that they were going to be able to compete with this team pretty much from the jump. There was no consistency on offense. The defense got absolutely run all over by this A&M team, and we'll get into that here in a second. But overall, this was a exclamation point on the Napier era. This was an absolute period. You're at home, back against the wall, backup quarterback on the other side, and you just get dominated. From start to finish, you just get rolled. And the good news is, this is only the second most embarrassing thing to happen to a Florida team on Saturday, so take it for what you will. But at the end of the day, it's hard for me to say anything other than Billy Napier will not be the head coach of Florida for, let's call my shot, in the next 48 hours. He will not be the head coach of Florida anymore, and they will be taking that flight to Mississippi State here in a couple of days without him. But a lot of stuff has to happen after that. It's going to be a crazy couple of months around Gainesville, Florida, and you got to hope you can keep DJ Lagway intact. That's the big-time goal, and we'll see what happens there, but it's about to go crazy at Florida. That's just the end-all, be-all of this game, but let's get into how A&M won. Marcel Reed was really impressive in this game, and it begged a lot of questions more than anything else, because he went 11 for 17, 178 yards, 2 touchdowns through the air, 13 carries, 83 yards, and a touchdown on the ground. He did everything that they needed him to do, and more than anything, he gave them an identity. I knew what A&M wanted to do on offense on Saturday, rather than what we saw in the first week, where had no earthly idea. I did not know what they wanted to be. I did not know if they were capable of being much of anything on offense. Marcel Reed gives them a central point, which is, we're going to run the ball. We're going to make it really multiple, really tough for you to figure out a way to stop that run, and then we're going to pick our moments in the pass game. They got a big play to Cyrus Allen, a number of things that, frankly, it's hard for me to look forward and say Connor Wegman should be the quarterback going forward. I am confused how he was the quarterback coming out in the Notre Dame game. But at the end of the day, this is the kid that gives you a better chance to win, because this is the kid that gives you an identity on offense. Connor Wegman just doesn't. He might be the more talented player. Doesn't necessarily matter at this very moment. Your job is to win games, and I think as of right now, Marcel Reed gives you a better chance. And then we talked about Marcel Reed's running ability. He was part of 3 guys that had 13 or more carries and 60 or more rushing yards in this game. They were all over the place, and they ran the ball in such a variety of ways that A&M could do everything, or Florida could do everything in their power. They weren't going to stop all these guys. And a lot of it had to do with the really gross conditions early on in the second half. But a number of really, really big players stepped up for them. Amari Daniels played a really good game. Le'Veon Moss was awesome. E.J. Smith made one of the craziest cuts that I've ever seen in my entire life when it was down really, really gross down there on the field. But Le'Veon Moss stepping up is huge. 110 yards on the ground in this game. Badly needs someone to take the reins in that running back room, and I think Le'Veon Moss will likely be that guy. And then finally, D-line domination. This was as glaringly obvious as it was the first couple of weeks for Florida, where Florida went 25 carries, 52 yards on the ground. A&M got home twice with sacks, but they were disruptive throughout this entire game. It was absolute nightmare for those two quarterbacks and put them in a position where they were going to make mistakes. And frankly, you couldn't make mistakes in this game if you wanted to win. So overall, this Florida team is broken. There's really no other way to put it. They have so many things to figure out, including who their next head coach is going to be. And then you got about a million other things to figure out. So it's going to be interesting to watch this unfold. There's no two ways about that. We will keep you updated as things start to go down. I tend to believe we will get news about Billy Napier being fired here pretty soon. They had a board meeting yesterday, and I have to imagine that a decision was made there. So we'll see what happens with that over the next little bit and who's coming to take over in Gainesville, because as we know, it's going to be an interesting hire at the very least. I think Lane Kiffin has been thrown around, and I won't put too much credence into that right now, but what I can say is if I was Lane Kiffin, I would take Florida over Ole Miss. But I'll leave it at that right now, and we'll see what happens going forward. Missouri had a really interesting win over Boston College. It kind of went the way that I thought it was going to go in this game. Boston College came out to a really quick start. Missouri was a little bit sluggish after a couple of games playing inferior opponents. That's pretty much bound to happen. It's very, very tough to walk into these games where the elevation is so aggressive when it comes to the talent level on the other side. It's usually going to take you a little bit of time. So fell down 14-3 in this game, then scored 24 straight points. Took the lead and never gave it back. Boston College did get a touchdown to make this one look a little bit better and a little bit more interesting, but overall, Missouri able to handle business here. I was really impressed with Boston College. I think this is one of those games where a lot of people thought maybe Boston College will be frisky for a little bit, but Missouri will end up pulling away. They'll, do the SEC thing where they kind of just dominate other conferences and take care of business, especially when they need to. That's not really what happened. Boston College did a really good job throughout this game, at least keeping Missouri in arm's length, which is not an easy thing to do with a lot of the other guys around there. But for Missouri, they are a team that can win the SEC. They are continue to roll on, continue to do what they need to do. Now, I still have big-time questions about that back end. I still have questions about this defense overall, but they did enough on Saturday, and now you turn your sights to the SEC play and you see what happens. But how they won this game, I think huge turnovers is as big of a part of this as really anything. When you talk about Reed Harris had a pick early on in this game when a lot of things were not going Missouri's way on the BC 25, and Missouri got their first touchdown of the game. And then later on in the game, Drayden Norwood got a big-time pick, and it wasn't necessarily like Missouri came right back down and scored, but they were able to set up a drive a little bit later on that went 13 plays, took 7.5 minutes off the clock, so was really, really impressive. And Missouri went up 13 during that. So it was one of those things where they didn't necessarily dominate defensively, at least throughout this game. There were a number of moments where Boston College had to feel pretty good about what they were doing offensively, but they made the plays. Missouri made the number of plays that they needed to make, which on Saturday ended up being 2. And they likely will have to make more coming forward, but this was enough to get that job done. And then Luther Burden is just downright incredible. It wasn't like he he did light up the stat sheet, but not to the extent that he probably can. He had 6 catches, 117 yards, a touchdown in this game. And that's not even what makes him special. That's not even the thing on this offense that makes him the biggest thing to worry about. Is what he does to defenses. He manipulates safeties and linebackers and corners in such a way that no one else in the country does. And it's so impressive, not only because, he is such a big player that you'd like to get the ball, but he does a lot of the dirty work just opening routes for other people, and the other people are really good. Theo Weiss is awesome. Mookie Cooper is awesome. Marquise Johnson is really good. There are so many guys out there that you can key on all those other guys. You're more than welcome to. Luther Burden's going to go for 250. You want to key on Luther Burden and stop him? fine. He's still going to go for 100 yards and everyone else on the field is going to be open. So it's a nightmare. You can't really defend this team, at least consistently, on the passing attack because there's too many guys. And then that guy in the middle is downright terrifying. And then finally, the defense tightening the screws was huge. Early, Boston College was doing pretty much exactly what they wanted to do. Rolling the clock, running the ball, keeping that defense off balance, especially with the quarterback run game. And then the defense was able to figure it out for Missouri. They were able to keep Thomas Castellanos kind of just at bay at the very least. Not an easy guy to keep in the pocket, but at the end of the day, his running ability was much less of a factor in the second half of this game. So it was one of those things that you just needed a couple of plays from that Missouri defense, and they really got them down the stretch of this one. So really impressive performance. I think it was one of those games that you could come out of it and say, well, it's Boston College. Missouri should have won by more. But the reality is down 14-3 early on in the game, in a game that is going to be, or was comfortably the toughest that Missouri's played thus far. Being able to come back and win is a big deal, keeps them in the hunt, keeps them where they want to be, and they're just playing really fun football right now. So Missouri's one of those teams that I've been open about. I've been a little bit skeptical of them, and I still am going as we head into SEC schedule, but they got a lot of things going for them. That's for sure. This defense is playing really good football right about now, and when you have that receiving core with that guy in the middle of it, like Luther Burden, a lot of things are going to go right. That's just the reality. So Missouri doing exactly what they needed to do. Bama the exact same way. And then Florida's going to have a new coach here pretty soon. I feel very, very confident saying that. I don't know how soon, and I don't know when he's going to get fired, but might just want to turn on Twitter notifications because I tend to believe it's going to happen at some point today. But that's just speculation. We'll figure out what happens, and we'll keep you updated as it unfolds. But let's take our third break here, and when we come back, we got to do a couple of upset watches because there were a lot around the country this past weekend. I'm going to jump into 4 where a group of 5 team either went to a Power 5 place or invited someone in their place and got a big time win, and we'll break those down right after this, so stick with us.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about some of the other games that went on, especially in the SEC. Bama absolutely rolled Wisconsin. A&M probably ended Billy Napier's career at Florida. And then Missouri got a big-time win over Boston College in the only ranked matchup of the day on Saturday. So big-time performances from all those guys, but let's get into a little bit of an upset watch because there were a number throughout this weekend that either gave us scares or were outright upsets. Now, there were so many upsets that this is what this segment is going to be. We're not going to get into the close calls because, frankly, we don't have time to get into the close calls. There were enough of these big-time upsets that we got to get into them to start, and we got to start with this one. I have no earthly idea what happened here, and it was a very tough day for Brandon Walker over there, but the reality is Toledo just went into Starkville and took Mississippi State to the woodshed. It was absolutely insane watching this score continue to rise for Toledo and move absolutely nowhere for Mississippi State. The payout for this game was $1.2 million, so a good day at the office for Toledo, no two ways about that, and there were a number of things to take away from this game. I think the biggest one was Tucker Gleason. He was really, really impressive. A transfer from Georgia Tech that made his way up to Toledo. 23 for 28, 325, 3 touchdowns. Did everything you wanted him to do. Really, really impressive game from him and was in full control of this offense against a defense that looked lost for a vast majority of this game on the Mississippi side of the ball. And then for Mississippi State, I think there's a number of questions. You got to figure out a number of things when it comes to the Mississippi State team. I think the biggest thing is they only had one guy over 50 yards rushing, had 66 total yards rushing. Blake Shapen had 2 turnovers. Everything went wrong, really, in this game for them, and it was one of those things that they should be able to run on Toledo. There's no reality where Mississippi State should not be able to run on Toledo, and if they can't, then they got big-time problems coming up in SEC play. But overall, I think there were a number of things to take away from this game. Toledo got after the quarterback, Blake Shapen, quite a bit in this game. 5 sacks, 6 tackles for loss in this game. They were all over the place. Really impressive performance from that group, and a lot of questions on the Mississippi State side of things. So it was one of those weekends where you had a lot of people play not so great football. You had a lot of people play really good football, and you have a number of coaches that are asking a number of questions, and Jeff Lebby is probably chief among them. He probably has no earthly idea what happened on Saturday because they are as lost as just about anyone right about now, and it does not get easier. They have a number of games coming up, including going to Texas, including going to Ole Miss at the end of the year. I think they have Alabama. It's a nightmare for Mississippi State, plain simple, and I think this is going to be one of those games. They'll likely play better next week, but this was rough. There's no two ways about that. They got paid $1.2 to come down to Starkville and dominate you and just take you to the woodshed. And now they have WKU before they get into conference play. This is definitely a team to watch. I think that MAC's schedule is becoming just so crazy and so many teams that could make some things happen in that conference that there might just be one that separates themselves, whether that's Miami of Ohio or Toledo or Northern Illinois, who knows. But at the end of the day, the MAC is becoming more and more fun by the day, and I absolutely love to see these upsets early on in the season. I think this is one where if you're Mississippi State, I don't really know how you deal with this one. I got to be honest. I think this is one of those that you got to just flush the tape, keep moving forward, hope that in the offseason you can get some things right and keep this thing moving forward under Jeff Lebby. But man, this one was gross. From start to finish, they got absolutely dominated in pretty much every facet of this game, and I don't know what the locker room talk was afterwards, but I gotta imagine it was a lot of silence. I'll just be totally honest. I don't think that was a very I don't think anyone was even really amped up. I don't think there was much yelling. I don't think there was much aggression. I think it was just what just happened more than anything else. But Mississippi State still has plenty in front of them. Obviously, this is the first year in hopefully, a very long time for Jeff Lebby to figure things out over there in Starkville. But man, this one's tough. And you were definitely the story of the weekend because you didn't take care of business. But at the end of the day, very impressive performance from Toledo. They keep moving forward, feel like a team that could maybe make some things happen in that CFP race. And then Mississippi State, just strap in. Just buckle down for the rest of the season. It's going to be ugly. Hopefully on the other side you can figure some things out. But let's get into this Georgia State game. This was insane. If you did not see the finish of this game, go check it out right about now. If you started about 2 minutes left, you'll get everything you need to know about this game because this was absolutely wild. Vandy got the ball back with about 2 minutes left, went down the field and scored in about 45 seconds. It looked like Georgia State was pretty much done. It looked like Vandy was able to close this thing out and get a win in a very scary circumstance. And then come the Panthers. They came right back down the field, and in very short amount of time, they threw a touchdown. Christian Velo played just incredibly well throughout this game under the circumstances, and that ball in the final touchdown with 15 seconds left, one of the prettiest balls in the entire weekend. Just absolutely incredible and shows you how important this guy is to this team. Coming over from Pitt, just a huge pickup in the portal there. And he played a really solid game. 26 for 41, 269 total, 4 touchdowns. Did really, really good stuff all over the place this weekend. And was another group of 5 quarterback that just caused a lot of problems for this team, particularly on the offensive line. There were a number of plays where Georgia State was just essentially able to blow it up. Vandy had 110 rushing yards, 3.2 yards per carry, kept Diego Pavia out of it for a lot of this game, which obviously plays a huge role in this, but Georgia State did a great job of responding in this game. When Vandy got within 2 at halftime, Georgia State came out with a field goal and a touchdown to extend the lead back to 12. And then Vandy cut it right back down to 5 after an INT. Georgia State came right back down and put it up to 12. So they did everything that you needed to do. And then obviously the final drive was the biggest response of the day. But really impressive stuff from this team where it felt like there were probably 5-6 moments in this game where it could have been like, okay, Vandy's going to pull away. They're going to be able to handle this one and it won't be a story at the end of the day. And then Georgia State just came right back and responded. It was really, really impressive. Kind of love to see it, being an Atlanta kid, love to see the team in my home city get something done here. But really impressive win. First time that an SEC team has gone down to play Georgia State in Atlanta. Can't imagine too many of them will be back. Let's just leave it at that right now. But a really good win for this team. Definitely gets them off on the right track. And I don't know if it'll be a remarkable season for Georgia State by any means, but still a very fun win and one that those kids can remember for quite some time. A really awesome game and one of the best finishes of the entire weekend. But let's get into this one because I don't even know what to say anymore. I got to be totally honest with you. I am at a loss for words for this Florida State team. There are so many different things that you saw in week one that you knew had to be fixed, that had to be fixed in very, very concrete ways that can be fixed. None of them have been fixed. And a lot of it has to do with the players. I'm not saying the coaches have done, terrible things or they're necessarily doing anything wrong. I think there is a wild miscommunication of what's happening in practice and what's happening on this field because obviously Mike Norvell knows what his team is at this point. He knows exactly who he has on the field. It's very clear that he is seeing something on the practice field that is not translating to the gameplay, and as long as that happens, they are not going to win games because you're not going to have a good game plan going in because you saw something one day on Thursday that you see something totally different on Saturday. So it's all over the place in Florida State, and I think you looked at this team after last week and you said maybe they can make a bowl game. Maybe they'll be able to get to 6 wins. Now 3 wins is a real possibility. I don't know what this team is. I genuinely don't know if they have many redeemable qualities. I think the defense is starting to play better, starting to play with a little bit more energy and passion, but when you have an offense like this, you're not going to be able to win games. There's no reality where Florida State cannot push the ball downfield and they can't run the ball. There's no reality where they're going to be able to win. That's the plain truth, and I think it's one of those things that you look at this Florida State team, there are so many things that should be going better. There are so many things that just should be better just from a sheer talent perspective. From a sheer you have Patrick Payton and they don't. You have Shaheem Brown and they don't. That should make a difference, and it just doesn't. It doesn't make any bit of difference, and frankly, Memphis did not play a clean game. Memphis probably played C+ football, maybe B- football in this game, and they still were able to handle this game pretty much from start to finish. So, I don't know. Florida State is as broken as can be right now, and I am as confused as pretty much anyone about how they got here, because this was a team coming in that had so much talent, that had so many things going in the right direction, particularly on the defensive side of the ball, and it's just looked like an entirely different team. If I flipped the jerseys and we just had gray jerseys on both these teams, you would firmly think the one in the Memphis team was the Power 5 team. You would think that Florida State was the Group of 5 team, and it wouldn't have been anywhere close. It was a wild game, and it was one of those that I don't know what Florida State does from here. I think when you look at this, there's obviously things that can be fixed, and they will be fixed, but they kind of can't be fixed until the end of the season. You kind of just have to strap in, hope that everything goes right the rest of the season, and then hopefully you can pull in a good recruiting class, get some more portal guys in there, but the reality is just getting a portal class in is not going to fix the problems that they have. They have to be able to recruit better on the in the recruiting world. They have to be able to just get more involved in high school recruiting and not lean so much on the portal, because it's just not going to work. It's not going to work on a consistent basis the way that they want to. So Florida State has a ton of things to figure out, and I think that Billy Napier hot seat, I'm not going to necessarily peddle in that too much. I think there are a lot of people kind of overreacting to that. I would be shocked if he was fired this year in pretty much any circumstance, but it doesn't change that there are a lot of things that need to get fixed, and they don't have too much time to fix them. But moving on to the final one here, UNLV was able to get a big-time win on Friday. This was an ugly game, for sure. This was a very sloppy game pretty much from start to finish, but UNLV gets their second win over a Big 12 opponent this year. Really impressive stuff, and the UNLV offense was a little bit all over the place. They made a number of good plays, but they definitely left quite a bit on the table. And then on the other side, if Jalen Daniels is not running the ball, if they don't have him as a threat running the ball, this is not a very good offense. He went 12 for 24, 153, and 2 interceptions through the air. If he's going to be able to stay in the pocket, if you can keep him there, you're going to have a lot of success against this team, because they don't have a lot of responses for that, especially in the past game. So it was one of those games that you felt like Jalen Daniels might just be able to open things up, might be able to make some things happen, but if he wasn't running the ball, there was just about nothing to be had in this game. And then from the UNLV perspective, Matthew Sluka was really special in this game. He was a ton of fun to watch throughout this one and cannot wait to see what he can do the rest of the season. He does need to figure out some of the just figure out not going into certain situations. He threw a number of balls that were downright crazy to throw. I'll just be totally honest with you. There were a number of plays in this game where you just held your breath as that ball was in the air. So got to figure that out. Definitely have to get more in the pass game, but he was a big time factor with his legs. As we talked about last week, that had to be the case if they were going to win this one. He was all over the place. Played really, really good football and is one of those guys that is going to cause problems for you. Really, really impressive player. And I think overall the biggest takeaway more than anything else was UNLV executed exactly how they needed to when they needed to. The final drive was an absolute thing of beauty. 18 plays, 75 yards, 9.5 minutes off the clock, and it finished with a game-winning touchdown. That is about as good as you can possibly draw it up if you're UNLV, especially against a team like Kansas that is so explosive on the offensive side of the ball. But as of right now, UNLV is your group of 5 rep. I don't think there's any argument otherwise. Matthew Sluka was incredible. 19 carries, 124 yards, a touchdown on the ground. The dude or a touchdown passing, apologies. None on the ground, but very, very impressive performance from him. And then on the other side, Jalen Daniels just wasn't good enough. He needs to figure out a way to get more consistent play, at least in the passing game, if they're going to do much of anything in the Big 12, because right now this looks like a very different team than what I thought I was going to see early on in the season. But overall, I think the biggest thing I took away from this game was UNLV is a real contender, and they didn't even play all that clean of football throughout a lot of this game, but able to get it done, move on to the Mountain West, have plenty of stuff to figure out, and big-time matchups coming down the road. But overall, this is going to be a really fun team to watch. They have Syracuse in 3 weeks here, I believe, and that's definitely one to watch. If they get that win, then I'm fully throwing myself behind the Running Rebels, and I'm buying in and trying to do everything I can to pedal the propaganda machine to get them in. I can promise you that. But it was a really, really fun weekend, a number of upsets that I don't know if anyone saw coming. I promise you, I did not preview Toledo, Mississippi State. I touched on Georgia State Vandy, but didn't necessarily preview too much. So I told you last week there were going to be a couple of games that went under the radar that none of us really saw going in that were going to be crazy, and we got plenty of them this past weekend. But let's take our final break here, and when we come back, we just got to do a little bit of a whip around. A number of things happened this past weekend that I got to get on y'all's radar, particularly an injury in that Texas quarterback room that maybe isn't that big of a deal. But we'll get into that right after this, so stick with us. Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just broke down some of the big time upsets this past weekend, including Toledo just outright dominating Mississippi State and Starkville, but let's get into a little bit of a week 3 whip around. There were a number of things that happened that we just got to get on y'all's radar. There were a number of really good games toward the backstretch of this weekend, but let's get into this real quickly, and we'll start with this game. We'll do this really quickly because obviously quite the blowout for Texas. They are the new number 1 team in the land. They're number 2 there because that's what they were when they played, but I realize I have these flipped. Texas did not lose this game by 49 points. They won it by 49 points, so no worries there, Longhorns fans. You were more than fine. But the big news coming out of this one is Quinn Ewers did have an abdominal strain early on in the game. Also had a little bit of a hand injury that didn't seem to bother him too much throughout this one, so I don't think that's much of a worry. But the abdominal strain looks like it's going to keep him out of the ULM game coming up this weekend, and then we'll see what happens in that Mississippi State game. Could be back for that game, could not. At the end of the day, if you're Texas, you likely want him healthy for that Oklahoma game after that bye week. So I would not be surprised if he missed the next 2 games. Would not be surprised if he missed the next one and then was back for Mississippi State. It'll definitely be something to watch. But Arch Manning came in and put on a show. There's no two ways about it. Went 9 for 12, 276 total yards, including a 67-yard touchdown run, and then had 5 total touchdowns. This kid was outright incredible, did everything that you wanted to do, and this team was a lot more explosive with him on the field. That was the one thing that he does a little bit better than Quinn Ewers is throw that deep ball. They utilized that a ton, and it was one of those things that you can see how incredible this kid is. You can see why everyone loves him so much. Obviously, it is UTSA, so we'll see what happens down the road, and if he plays that Mississippi State team or even plays in that Oklahoma game, we'll get a really good idea of who he is, but this was really impressive. There's no two ways about that. He did not think he was going to play in this game, at least until much later on, and he was thrust into action and just did everything perfectly. It was really impressive, and another reason why Texas has really nothing to worry about in that quarterback room. Like, Quinn needs to be back for them to win a title. I feel very confident in that. This offense is not nearly as nuanced and multiple with Arch Manning on the field rather than Quinn Ewers, but at the end of the day, Arch Manning should be more than fine to get them through this little bit before they get Quinn Ewers back, and it was a tough night for everyone that said Arch Manning is a 5-star because of his name, because he put on a show, and he showed that he might have just been a 5-star because he's a really good football player. But let's move on to this one. This might have been one of the more fun games of the entire weekend as well. Washington, just off the bat, that 2-point conversion call is outright insane. I have no earthly idea how they thought that was going to work, but ridiculous. More than anything, Washington State just got a huge win. This is one of those wins that it makes you think differently about this Washington State team in a number of different ways. I think you have a number of guys to watch here, and the biggest one for me is John Mateer. He played a really solid game, did just enough, kind of created problems for this team, had 16 carries, 62 yards, 2 touchdowns, did exactly what he needed to do with his legs throughout this game. And I think when you look at this Washington State team, look at the rest of their schedule. Take the time to look at the rest of their schedule, because there's a Boise State game at Boise State in a couple of weeks. If they win that one, this is a team that can make the playoff. And that sounds crazy because there was a notion that I kind of laughed off throughout the offseason, but this is a team that can really make some things happen. And if they can win that Boise State game, it might just be hard to deny them out of that CFP. But we'll obviously get to that throughout the season, and we'll see how that develops. But right now, Washington State might just be one of those teams. Oregon sent their statement. They did the thing that we absolutely needed them to do. They were who we thought they were for a lot of the season. They just needed a little bit more of a runway to get going. Everything that was a problem going into this game for Oregon was not really a problem in this game. Oregon had tons of explosive plays, I believe 5 or 6 over 20 yards. Tez Johnson got involved with over 100 yards, ran for 240, so the offensive line was so much better. Dominant defense all over the field, which didn't necessarily need to come along, was already playing really good football, but definitely nice to see nonetheless. They did everything that you needed them to do to feel really confident in this team going forward, and I think they're ready to roll. I think it's one of those things where they just needed one of these performances. They just needed one to give them all that confidence, get the juices flowing in. Now they go into conference play, and we'll see what happens there, but this was the Oregon that I expected to see throughout the season, and I expect to see a lot more of it throughout the rest of the season. Oklahoma escaped in some ways in this game. Now, it ended up being not all that close, or at the end not all that close, but Oklahoma did need a late touchdown to make this one happen. I do think the big thing that I'm taking away from this is Oklahoma was in a position up 21-6 going into halftime, and after one of the most bizarre missed extra points I've ever seen, by the way, but they just couldn't get a knockout punch until very late in this game. They just could not quite put Tulane away, and it's something that if you give anyone else life in the SEC, you're going to have a big-time problem. But one of the big-time things is the O-line is still an issue. They're still going to have to figure that out, and the SEC team, especially the one coming this weekend in Tennessee, is going to be able to take advantage of that. But Jackson Arnold running the ball was a nice little counter to that. Had 14 carries, 97 yards, 2 touchdowns. Keeping that in the mix at the very least makes the job so much easier for that offensive line. So a big-time win definitely gets them a little bit of confidence. Definitely looked cleaner across the board for Oklahoma in this game. But now you got Tennessee coming to town, and we'll see what happens there. But they got to play a ton better to win that game. I can promise you that. Kansas State got a huge win over Arizona on Friday, and we got to talk about this one because there are a couple of big-time takeaways. And the biggest one for me is Arizona is essentially nothing on offense. They're a really fun team that has 2 really, really good players in Noah Fafita and Tatori McMillan. They don't have anyone else that they feel comfortable with. That's just the reality of this offense right now. There is no one else out there. Lamonius Craig, I believe, had 50 yards. I think a lot of them came in garbage time. So it wasn't like they were really pushing the ball around and forcing it to other people and doing all the things that they just very much have to do if they're going to be able to be successful. I don't know what Dino Babers' approach is right now. It's got to change, plain and simple. They have to find a way to get T-Mac the ball, no doubt about it, but spread it out so it's easier to get him the ball. It is so hard to get that guy the ball right now that he essentially just has to make a remarkable play for him to make that catch. So there are a number of things that need to be fixed there. The Kansas State side, Avery Johnson finally got in on the act, had 110 yards rushing in, definitely kept this Arizona defense on their heels, but it was one of those games that Kansas State proved who they are. I think they proved that they are one of the class teams in the Big 12. I think Arizona is one of those teams that's just very far from where they need to be, and they're not far enough from conference schedule to be that far from where they need to be. So it might just be a tough season for Brent Brennan in his first year at Arizona, but Kansas State with a big-time statement, the team that I have winning the conference, feel pretty good about that right about now. But moving forward to the Backyard Brawl, this was one of the more fun games of the entire weekend. This was absolutely awesome. West Virginia loses this one by 4 on a last-second touchdown by, I believe, I don't want to get this wrong. Cannot find his name. I apologize. But whoever scored that touchdown, congratulations to you. But there were a number of big-time plays in this game. The guy that really stole the show was Eli Holstein. It was really impressive. The Alabama transfer, very talented guy coming out of high school, but came in with Dylan Lonergan, kind of created a little bit of a logjam there. But found his way up to Pitt, 21 for 30, 360 total yards, 3 total touchdowns. He was incredible. He did everything you want him to do, including just escaping one of the most ridiculous sacks I've ever seen someone escape. But really impressive performance. He played everything. He left everything out there on the field. And then from the West Virginia side, they have so many issues. I don't know what this team is right now. I don't know what they want to be defensively, especially, but also offensively. I think they're a little bit clunky. They're just not really getting that rhythm that you expect to find with a third-year starter like Garrett Green. Garrett Green. But overall, huge win for Pitt. They get a rivalry win. Then they get Youngstown State before a bye, and we'll see what happens in ACC play. This is a team that I don't know how far they're going to go, but if Eli Holstein's playing this level of football, definitely a team worth the watch. I can promise you that. But let's talk about UCF and TCU. This one was crazy. It was back and forth. It was absolutely wild. Very glad I got that TCU +1 when I did, because worked out pretty nicely. I got a little bit of a push here, but I said early on in this last week, I said when we were talking about this game that UCF had to find a passing attack. Well, KJ Jefferson went 13 for 22, 230 yards and 3 touchdowns. He did exactly what you needed them to do. And then TCU on the other side could only pass the ball. They had 58 rushing yards compared to over 400 passing. Cam Cook just has to be more for this team. If they're going to be able to win games in the Big 12, especially with a lot of the offenses that they're going to face, they need a go-to running back, and it's got to be Cam Cook at the end of the day. So they're going to have to figure out a way to get him more involved in the offense, because if they can, it's going to be really tough. And then UCF, they've done what they needed to do. They started this conference schedule the way that they wanted to, and now you get a bye, then Colorado at home, then at Florida. So you got to feel pretty good about those games as you go into the next little bit, and then they'll probably be favored in every game until at Iowa State. this is a dangerous team down in Orlando, and we knew that going into the season. I was a little bit skeptical and still am to a certain degree, but I do think this is a team that got exactly what they needed this weekend and is going to move forward and probably feel pretty good about their chances to win this conference. And then finally, Colorado. Why do I keep doing this wrong? Colorado beat Colorado State 28-9. I apologize. I'm getting all of my graphics a little bit screwed up today. But Colorado did get a big-time win over Colorado State 28-9, and the show was the show that it is for every single Colorado game. Shedeur Sanders was magic. He was absolutely incredible in this game. 36 for 49, 310, 4 passing touchdowns. Didn't necessarily, light the scoreboard on fire the way that I think a lot of people expected them to, but executed. And that's the most important thing, especially with a team that has had points where you're just kind of questioning what the execution level is or how much they want to execute at that level. They were really clean. And frankly, I think this might be the most impressive performance that I've seen from the Deion Sanders Colorado teams. I thought it was really, really impressive going up to a rival environment, a lot of people against you, that, and being able to just play really clean football. And that's one of the few times you've seen Colorado be able to do that, even in the wins they had last year. It was pretty ugly football that was just, interspersed with some big-time plays. But this was clean. This was really good, and I thought they played really impressive football. So was very impressed with Colorado coming out of this one. I think this is one of those games that I don't know if it changes my opinion on Colorado going forward, but definitely makes me feel a little bit more confident about what that locker room is compared to what I felt like it was last week after the Nebraska game. But overall, very impressive performance. And then this kid is insane. 13 catches, 100 receiving yards. He had 2 touchdowns. He also had a pick on the defensive side of the ball. The kid's incredible. He also chased down a guy from 65. He's the best player in football. We're not having a conversation otherwise. This guy is outright incredible. He won't win the Heisman. I'm going to go ahead and tear your heart out with that one already. He's going to be on too bad of a team to win the Heisman. I tend to believe there is going to be a point in the season where maybe those snaps just build up a little bit too much and he has to miss a game or two at some point. I hope that doesn't happen, obviously, but has happened in the past couple of years and definitely is a reality for this player. But this is a really fun team. This is a team that feels like they're slowly finding themselves. And now I don't think they're going to make a Big 12 run. I don't necessarily think they're a team that's going to be all that scary for the Utahs and the Oklahoma States of the world, but a really impressive win nonetheless. They might have found a little bit of a run game with Michael Welsh, the freshman running back out of Milledgeville, Georgia, not too far from me right about now, but he might just be the answer at running back. And if they find any bit of a running attack, then they're definitely going to be able to score a ton of points against teams. And then just a PS here for anyone that was waiting for me to comment on it. I don't have a problem with how Shedeur handled the postgame. If Braden Fowler, Nicolosi, and Torrey Horton want to talk all the crap going into the game, they don't get to act like best friends afterwards. That's my personal take on it. I understand there are people that have opposite takes. I'm not necessarily even the biggest fan of people talking crap going into games. I don't necessarily love it. Would not be the way that I go about business. Doesn't change that if you do, you can't be mad when the person gives it back to you. So I have no problem with how Shedeur handled that. I have questions about how he handled the post game, but that's a totally side conversation. I think the way he handled himself on the field is probably the way that I would have handled myself if that guy had said what he said about me. So that's just beside the point. Wanted to get that in there because I had a feeling there were going to be some people that were trying to get me to say anything bad about Shedeur in that circumstance. I don't think he did anything wrong, just plain and simple. I don't think that's an issue at all. I think it's a rivalry, and I think they're treating it that way. But very long show, and that gives you an idea of how crazy of a weekend this was. But that will do it for this edition of the GSMC College Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. Your support means a lot to us, so please remember to subscribe to the show, leave a positive review. It does make a huge difference for us. Also, follow us on Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, Instagram, all of the social pages for all of the content and updates you could possibly need. We have really incredible people doing awesome work across every single sport. So if you're not just a college football guy, if you love the NFL, if you love baseball, if you love basketball, we got it fully covered for you over on GSMC. But thank you once again for listening, and I will see you tomorrow, likely for more breakdowns of this crazy Week 3 we just had.